Welcome to the channel of Truth, Trust, and Transparency. Today, I'm answering another one of your questions as best as I can. Now, before I get into this particular question, and as always, I want to make it extremely clear that you guys understand why and how I'm making the videos. I am not licensed to give you financial advice, to tell you what to do. I don't have an AFSL, I'm not a mortgage broker, I'm not an accountant, I'm none of those things. I'm a property investor and I'm a developer. I make educational content for that purpose only, to educate you, to give you things to think about, to challenge the way that you think, so that you can take what you've learnt from the video and then go and talk to those professionals in your circle about what you could potentially do. If you need recommendations for any of those, I'm happy to give you them. I don't get referrals, I don't get kickbacks. I'll tell you who I believe is good in space, who you should go and talk to. You don't even have to tell them that I told you that they're good. You just go straight to them. That way, when you have a good time, you come back and thank me, you come back and watch my videos, and they get business out of it, you get solved. It's a win-win-win. Now, Daniel's questions are really interesting. He said, thanks for the vid, mate. This was on another video of my YouTube. You answered it perfectly. I'm just at a crossroads at the moment. I've purchased 2 properties in a hot market with 6 and 6.5% yields. I have borrowing capacity left to get one more property, which I'll get in a different market for diversity's sake. However, I have 2 options. Congratulations, Daniel. So you've got 1, you've got 2, and 3 is a question mark. 6%, 6.5%. Awesome. Now, option 1, buy in personal name. Benefits are cheaper purchasing costs due to limit on the costs and tax deductions. Also planning to sell the first one in 1 to 2 years. Okay. To get borrowing capacity back after hopeful substantial growth. Then get into the trusts from there. This will completely take me out of the market as my borrowing capacity will be used up until I free it up by selling one. Option 2, buy the third in a trust. I'd have to save for 9 to 12 months to offset the difference of the equity release. One of the first 2 has usable equity, 80 to 100K now, so I can buy now. This will be more time out of the market, plus using equity will get me in slightly negative. Here is the kicker with this particular question though. I'm trying to retire ASAP, maximum 7 years. Which of these options do you see being the fastest? Again, as I said, I can't tell you and inform you about purchasing in trusts. I'm not an accountant, I'm not a mortgage broker, I don't have an AFSL. But Daniel, I'll be realistic with you. Although you have left it a little bit late, if you're wanting to retire in 7 years, I'd say you're maybe in your 40s, 50s, 60s, something like that, and you've only got 2 properties on the board. We do have limited options. 7 years to retire is probably one more growth cycle, one more growth run of wherever you're buying in and whatever it is you're buying. So we need to be really strategic. This is a really good question. I've thought a lot about what would I do in that situation. Not financial advice, but I thought, look, if I'm in that particular situation, what could I do to be able to set up myself and give myself some sort of passive income into retirement? Now, one thing I did consider, and one thing I probably don't know, so I've got to make assumptions here as well, Daniel, unfortunately, just about your income, how much you earn, if there's any other debts. I don't know your income. And I don't know what your PPR status is because you said you've got 2 investments. I don't know if you have a house fully paid off or if you don't. Obviously, if you have a house and it is fully paid off, then you want to potentially consider and think about the term called debt recycling. I've done videos on it, so you can go back and watch those. That would be one option. If you do have a PPR, you're sitting on it and it's got no mortgage on it. But if you don't have a PPR and potentially this is all that you've got and you just want to maybe rent out and then enjoy your retirement that way, you definitely can. The first path that I thought about was, you're buying, we run it through a cycle, we sell, we pay CGT, and then we leverage into commercial property. Now, personally, my opinion with it in this kind of situation is that we might only be leveraging into one property, one commercial property. Now, it could be by the time you buy these, and again, one thing you haven't told me as well is the price that you've bought these properties for. So all of this video is sort of assumptions. You'll have to fill in the blanks, but the strategy could be used and could be applicable to not only Daniel, but anyone else watching. So I thought, okay, but if I buy a third, I run them through a cycle. By the time I sell off, I might only be in for like one commercial property, one factory, right? Now, the issue with that is it's kind of like building a table with one leg. With commercial, we do have, typically, if it's like maybe an industrial asset, we have longer vacancy rates. Like a commercial property isn't released usually in like, you know, a week or a week and a half like residential. So if you were relying just on one property and it was say 6 months, you might, and you're in sort of that retirement phase, that might not be a really good solution for you to have all your eggs in that sort of one basket. So I thought maybe it's not a commercial play here because we've only got one cycle, we've got 2 properties in the third. But again, I won't tell you what way to go in terms of personal name and trust, but with your borrowing capacity, and I think with a really good broker, if you can get 3 over the line, this is sort of where my mind goes to think about. And if you've been capped out, I would encourage you to speak to really good mortgage brokers. You want to look for the mortgage brokers that have built 10 plus property portfolios themselves, because they have, and I know every mortgage broker thinks they're created equally and they all have access, just they're not. I'll tell you that straight up. I've went through plenty of mortgage brokers, and you know, some can get you here but can't get you there. And you want those guys that have got 10, 15, 20 property portfolios. If you have a look on Everything Property, I've interviewed a couple of those guys, listened to a couple of those stories, and that's the biggest hint I can give you in terms of who to go with. Because I always like a mortgage broker that's gone out and done it himself, not just for clients. So I think with a mortgage broker, you can definitely, with a good mortgage broker, and working on the tiers of lending, so you don't just have to go to Big Four, you might be going down to 2 or 3 tiers of lending with banks that have potentially a higher interest rate. Because for us, we need to get our hands on as many assets as possible in a very short time frame. So you might have to wear that negative gearing element for a couple of years now to live a fruitful retirement. If you come to me, you can't have it all. You can't come and say, look, I want to have a positive cash flow property. I'm just starting it now. And I want to roll into retirement and earn millions of dollars. And I've only got 7 years and I've only got limited savings and I've got, 80, 100 grand in equity. We need to make a couple of sacrifices to figure out what we can put up with. If you're still working now, let's potentially think about, okay, I'm working, I can I can wear that negative gearing for a little bit until retirement, so that when I get into retirement, I can have the fruits of my labor. This is where my mind goes with your sort of property portfolio, Daniel. This is what I would do. For property number 3, and I think your big play is going to be granny flats. So property 3, what I'd think about, and people say they love granny flats, people say they hate granny flats. People say that, oh, you put the granny flat on, it devalues it. At this very moment, we're not looking for you to sell any of these next assets. If I were doing it me and I put a granny flat on, that I'm putting a granny flat asset on an asset where I don't care about the value. That's a cash flow play, and I'm going to hold that for as long as possible because that shit is going to print money and pay me my retirement. So number 3, I would look for something that is a large land size, and then it's also got granny flat potential. That's what I would do with number 3. Then, so I've got 3 property purchases right then. Then, my friend, get 3 out of the way, then we go back and visit property number 1 here. Now, again, I don't know what you've bought it for. I don't know where it sits. I don't know how long you've owned it, but 6%, maybe it's in like a Townsville or something like that. So you've probably had pretty good growth on it. And what I would do is just crunch the numbers on this so that when I sell it, and this is where I plug my broker into it and I say, hey, this is the property. I want to sell it and I want to get into 2 more property purchases. So I have 2, 3, 4 all up. Now you might think, I can't get into 4, I don't have the borrowing capacity. Let's go down a few tiers in lending. But also the profit from that, hopefully you can put down a deposit that is large enough that the banks are satisfied with. Because a lot of those banks on the 2nd and 3rd tier of lending, if you're putting down a really big deposit, that can sometimes get you over the line because you have less debt, and then you get closer to a neutrally or positively geared property. Because if you go only at 10%, 5% or 6% interest rates, it's only a 4 or 5% rental yield, you probably don't have that opportunity. However, if you're putting down a 20% deposit on these purchases, and that could be, $500,000 purchase, 20% deposit, perfect. You know what I mean? I want to try to get this one in the next, me personally, I'd want to sell this one in the next couple of years. As you said, 2 to 4 is probably smart. I then will buy another house, exact same. Different suburbs, getting the best asset I can from the sale of this property. So then what am I left with? That's got 6.5%. Then I have 3 properties that are all large land size that all have granny flat potential. Now, then after you've done that, you're going to do absolutely nothing. Then I would do absolutely nothing until it comes to year 6 before I want to retire. So 6 years away. Remember, I'm buying these properties and I'm giving them as much time as possible to marinate. This second property that you own, you've had now for maybe a year, 2, 3, 5 years, I'm not too sure. But if in another 6 years, remember we've got that compounding effect. So even if it was in one of those hot spots, you've then, and it's went, say, for example, 350 to 700, and then you hold it for 6 years. Okay, it might have only grown at 4 or 5%, but you've had 5% then on 700,000. So you've been able to have that growth consistently for the next 5 years. Then when we get to year 6, here's what I would do personally. I would sell off this property here, and then with the profits, and remember, two things you need to do. I'm selling this house off, and on the other side, for the next 6 to 7 years, I'm saving as much money as possible. Let's just say you're on 150 grand, becomes 120-ish after, it becomes maybe 120 after you pay some tax, and you can save, say, 30 grand a year, 30 to 40K a year. If you're old, Daniel, and you're about to retire, I'm going to assume you have that. Remember, I'm going to assume you're going to have that available. Now, times that by 6, you're going to have 180K to 240K. Sorry, 240K saved. What I'm going to do in that 6 years' time is take the money that I've saved on this house, and I'm going to add, I'm going to add a granny flat here. When I sell this house, then I'm also going to pay, and this granny flat, by the way, you're putting it in cash. I'll tell you why. When I sell this one here, I'm then putting on these 2 properties, granny flats. Granny flat. So that way, by the time they're finished and rented out, and remember, I might have bought these for 500 grand, these houses, it could be 400 or 500 grand, but in 6 to 7 years' time, in a property cycle's time, they're going to be closer to potentially $700,000-800,000. So when I'm putting the granny flats here in cash, they're going to be renting now for probably $500-600 a week, which is going to pull in $30K per property. 30K. So there, you've just built yourself 90 grand passive income just from the granny flats. Just from the granny flats, douche, douche, douche. Just from the granny flats, 90 grand. Now you might say, oh, there's a bit of admin costs, there's a bit of blah, blah, blah. But the granny flats are also brand new. So you're going to get that depreciation element that is going to offset any of that and be on top of this. So that's 90 grand. Then what else are you left with? Remember, to build these two granny flats, you've done this one in cash. Granny flat costs, despite what some people try to trick their clients in, they're not for 300-400 grand. You'll be able to build 220, something like that. So not only are you building one in cash, then you're using, say, 440 to build the other two. There is likeliness that if you have bought this property 1-2 years ago and you've held it for 10 years, you're going to have more than $440,000 in profit. Perfect. I'm going to sit that against the mortgages of these two. So automatically, these properties will have such a low in 6-7 years' time. You know, the rents have increased. The debt could stay the same. The debt could stay the same and it won't matter because the rents have increased. And when the rents increased, the rents are always, the hardest time to hold a property is when you first buy it. But your repayments are very similar, right? And the rents are increasing. We get to that point where the rent is covering those repayments. So all these properties need to technically do is pay for themselves. Now, if you go, Dave, I don't really need 90 grand to be honest. Again, I don't know what the house situation is or anything like that, but 90 grand is very decent in terms of maybe just renting somewhere with yourself or with your partner. I don't know if there's a partner as well. It's another thing I don't know. But you might want to focus some sort of this income towards paying down some of these. Right? You might have a whole heap of equity left from this purchase where you go, okay, well, I've only got 250 grand or I've only got 200 grand on the mortgage. I'm going to smash that out in 4 years. And then once you pay that one off, then we can attack the second, then we can potentially attack the third, or you can leave them. Depends how much money you want to take. But let's look at it this way. If they're 500 grand, they've went up to $700,000. Now, when you bought these, let's just say they're 400-500 grand. In 7 years' time, when you're retiring, the prices went up and the yield has went up. So that because the rent has increased, remember, you bought them for 400-500 grand, your yield on the purchase price is probably going to be maybe 8%. They might be bringing in now somewhere around 50K a pop, close to 50K a pop. You're going to have, as I always say, probably 10 grand of expenses. So you'll be able to pull in maybe about 40 grand or so per property. Could be a bit more, could be a bit less. But that, my friend, is 120. That's 120 from 3 properties. And that's 90. That's 210K. Now, obviously, you're not going to get that. You're not going to get that all the time. You're not going to get that full amount straight away. It's difficult to tell you when you'll get it because I don't know how the pricing of this, but essentially if we're putting that and maybe you've got more savings, right? And we're putting that against property one and we can pay that off, you know, then I can use that then I can rapidly pay down. Like imagine you had one property, right? And you can reduce your living expenses. You can put an extra 40 grand a year on that property. As I said, if it's got a $200,000-$300,000 mortgage, 5-6 years, that's fully paid off. And then you've got 2 stacked up, paying off that one, then maybe a bit extra. So you can eventually start to pay those off a lot quicker. You can keep them just to tick over. They'll be positively cash flowed because again, you would have held them for 6-7 years. 6-7 years of rental growth would have offset that cost to own them and those mortgage repayments. Because again, your mortgage might be 300-400 grand. We've probably put down those 20% deposits as well from here. We haven't even touched equity in this situation, right? So you're not on top of each other, borrowing on top of loans on top of equity. But that's the way that I see it. Quick 90K here. Now, obviously, you've got to pay tax and all that kind of stuff. But it might be a way as well that you can get an extra 120. That would be 210 total. That's where mine goes for your current situation, Daniel. And again, not financial advice, something to maybe think about. Speak to your mortgage broker, or if you need a good one, again, head to Everything Property. Have a look at a couple of those mortgage brokers that I have interviewed and those guys that have built those large portfolios. If you scroll through, you'll see and know who they are. I'd be doing that. That's what I would do in probably your situation. You're starting very late. We've only got one property cycle, and yeah, the granny flat is a really good play. Obviously, not if you're buying to sell. You wouldn't put granny flats on these ones, in my opinion, because you're going to sell them anyway. So I just want to run these up, use the profits, roll it into, and then I have 3 properties, 1, 2, 3. Granny flats, and yeah, that's 100k plus in retirement. Let me know what your thoughts are, if you agree or disagree. Comments down below, and as always, guys, I'll see you tomorrow.